So here's where we are in the outline, just as a reminder. So we're down number 9 right now, the 7 steps of an interview. This is basically, this has to do with knocking on a door and speaking with someone, but even if you're not knocking on doors, it applies all the way across the board, people with whom you're speaking about Christ, and it has to do with everything about it. So it's whether you're knocking on a door or you're talking to someone at work, it all has the same thing, same application. So let's first of all notice this passage. I'll go down to the slide here first of all. We started with 1 Corinthians chapter 9. There it is, verses 19. I thought it was 19. 1 Corinthians 9, and this passage shows us a real. I think it's a very good personal work text. It's also a good about how to win souls. So let's look what Paul has to say regarding it. 1 Corinthians 9, we'll start at verse 19. For though I was free from all men, I brought myself under bondage to all that I might gain the more. To the Jews, I became as a Jew, that I might gain Jews. What does that mean? I became as a Jew, that I might gain Jews. He was a Jew, but what does that mean? I became as a Jew, that I might gain Jews. What does that mean? I became a Jew. His thinking, actions, what actions might he be talking about here? Okay, their own language, style of living. What about the style of living? What about the Jewish culture did Paul adapt himself to? The law, right, the law. And he's going to go, that's exactly what he's going to talk about, the regulatory system of the law. When he lives in Israel, he obeyed the law. Why? Because the law was a valid system still? No, because that's how he might gain the Jews. So he goes on to tell us very boldly, I became as a Jew that I might gain Jews. To them that are under the law, as under the law. That is, he didn't disregard the law and flout it. In Israel, he lived under the law. Do we find an example of that in Acts? Yes, Acts 21, when he came to Jerusalem. Remember, he took a vow upon himself with others, and he went to offer sacrifice in the temple. Now, that didn't turn out very well. That was the beginning of the end. But nevertheless, that was the advice of James and the other brethren to whom he had come. First, the church. James, the brother of our Lord, was one of the leaders of the church, said, here's what you need to do. You need to go offer sacrifice because they think that you hate the Jews and that you're trying to destroy Judaism. Well, the law of Moses had been set aside indeed, but as living in Israel, he became as one living in Israel, obeying the law. Then he tells us, and that's that I might gain them that are under the law, not that because that's a valid system, to them that are without law as without law. That is, when he's outside of Israel, he's living in Italy, or if he's living in Asia or in Greece, he obeyed their systems. He did not flout their system. That doesn't mean that he worshiped false gods, of course, but it does mean that the cultural practices that they had, whether it be eating meat sacrificed to idols that had been sacrificed in the temple, he tells us he ate that. Unless someone brought up the point, well, this was offered to a false god, then he said, no, I'm not going to do that. But he bought it in the marketplace. He didn't go around asking a bunch of questions about it. Where was the sacrifice? How was the sacrifice given? No, he just bought the meat and ate it. That's 1 Corinthians chapters 9, 10, and 11. No, I mean, sorry, 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 10, yeah. Then, to them without law, as without law, not being without law to God, but he said, under law to Christ. Notice that. He's under law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might gain the weak. What does that mean? That means he didn't literally become weak, but he didn't lord it over individuals. And we'll talk about some of that in just a moment as far as personal work is concerned. And you don't just come across just banging people on the head. Now become all things to all men, that I may by all means save some. So what is the bottom line? I may by all means save some. That's the bottom line, and that's what we're interested in evangelism. So with that in mind, we're going to look at the different steps of an interview, how we approach people. So any thoughts about that passage that maybe we've left unsaid or stones that we've left unturned? Anything, David, you want to add? You know what? I'm glad you said that. I wouldn't have worded it that way, but I appreciate that because I think that speaks. Sometimes we're a little reticent to say anything, but I think that's what people naturally think, or they should. And if you're not thinking that way, I don't think we're entering into the text. And that is, how did he become as a Jew? And does it bother you a little bit? Okay, he became as a Jew that he might gain the Jews. So he's not a Jew, or he's a Jew by blood, but he's not a Jew by religion. And but instead he's under the law of Christ. He's a Christian. He's not bound by the law of Moses, and yet when he's in Israel or with his Jews, he lives by that law. So what does that mean? And how does it bother us? Right. I think that is an excellent commentary. I don't know if you heard what he had to say in the back, but Paul, he lived as a Christian, but he was adapting himself to the Jewish law system in order that he might gain Jews. Now, an example of that is he mentioned the synagogue. Hobbes mentioned the synagogue. Okay, perfect illustration. Is Saturday the day to worship God in a collective fashion? No, it's Sunday. Did Paul worship God on Saturdays? Yes. Did he do it in a synagogue? Yes. Yes, he did. Did he wear a prayer shawl? Yes. He's not going to get in unless he did. Does that bother us? Well, people might say, well, he's going to be withdrawn from fellowship. We might be a little bit quick to pull the trigger on that one, wouldn't we? He went into the Jewish synagogues, and as a Jew, and wearing the prayer shawl, and quoting the Shema, as they all did, stood up to speak in a synagogue, and it was participating in synagogue worship. Well, he was adapting himself to the Jewish culture, but he said, I am under the law of Christ. He said, not being under the law of Moses, I'm not under the law. But he did adapt himself to that. He was not bound by it, but he did that in order that he might gain the Jews. Pretty sobering to think about how that happened. And people have discussed that incident in Acts 21 that I mentioned, where he went to the temple and offered a sacrifice to God, and as James said, show that you're keeping the law. The law was not only a religious system, but the law of Moses was a civic system. And so you're going to be in Israel, you're going to obey the law. You're going to do that. And that's how they managed the entire civic system, by the law of Moses. So it was a civic code as well as a religious code, and Paul did adapt himself to it and went religiously into the temple and offered a sacrifice, Acts 21. But that is not to say that the system was a valid system. He was simply adapting himself, as this passage shows us. He was not under the law of Moses, but he adapted himself that he might gain the Jews. Now, some people have argued that Paul made a mistake there in Acts 21. I don't know, it did turn pretty sour real quickly, and that was the beginning, as I mentioned, of the end. But that's how he did. So when he was in Greece, he adapted himself to the Greek customs. And they would have to dress as a Greek, speak as Greek. He would have to go to Greek places. He would buy food in the marketplaces. Would you buy the food in the marketplace in Jerusalem that they would have in Athens? No. No, you would not. The food in the marketplace in Athens would be offered at an idol temple. All of the meat. So you go to the supermarket, you see cuts of meat. Okay, we know how the butchers do it, but in that day, they came right out of the idol temple. That's where they came from. And he says, buy the meat, eat the meat, don't ask any questions for conscience sake, just do it. What? But some people might say, well, you're participating in idol worship. See, that's how we kind of get off and say, well, you're participating in idol worship. He said, if someone says that, then he said, okay, I'll abstain. That because he says he wants to please everyone. He doesn't want to be considered to be violating the law of God. So he says, okay, I'm not going to do that. He said, if you go to someone's house and they're eating, and they have all this sumptuous meal out here, and it's in a pagan city, and they offer the meat. He said, don't go asking a bunch of questions. Where does this meat come from? Was this meat offered on the idol? At the idol, at the temple up here? Was there? No, he said, don't ask those questions. But if someone says to you, hey, don't you know this was offered at the idol temple? He said, okay, right there, he says, they see it as you're participating in idol worship. He says, I'll not do that. Then he says, I'll eat no meat forevermore. So he participates in the culture, even if it has religious ramifications, in order that he might gain those who are lost. So it is interesting. I like the way David said it. We would be very quick to withdraw fellowship sometimes. Generally speaking, I know, with someone who did that. Well, you went over to the Jewish synagogue and you put a prayer shawl on and you walked in there and you stood up and preached. Well, so anyway, all right. Those are some ideas about adapting himself to the culture and time. So with that in mind, let's think about the 7 steps of an interview. Now remember, there are different kinds of calls. Let me back up and note this one. I think this was right here. Oh, no. Yeah. So there's a friendly call. That is, we're simply establishing friendly communications. Most of our work will be right here, won't it? We're trying to establish friendly communications, but the goal is that we move on. We're not simply trying to be friends. We want to be that, but we want also to have other calls. That is, church-related call. Okay, some of them are going to be inviting people to services, or can I pick up your children? We're happy that you were here last week, and we would like to have you come back. You're not teaching anything yet, but it is a church-related call. It's related to the church. It's related to whether the children are at church or whether they have come to church themselves. So it's a church-related call, not simply on friendly basis. Always friendly basis, but now it's stepped a little bit further. Then the next one is a teaching call. That is what? All right, can I sit down with you and can we look at the Bible? Can we study the Bible together? Let's use your Bible. I never forget, I had Mormons come to the house when I was in East Kentucky. And I had been studying a lot about Mormonism. I had some articles in the paper about it, and some of them kind of hard-hitting. But Mormons came to the door, and so I said, I'm happy to study with you. Come on in, we'll study. And I had one book on the table. What book was that? The Book of Mormon. Only the Book of Mormon. I said, yeah, let's study the Book of Mormon. Let's look at it. I'm going to start where they were. Let's start here. And I went to passages such as 1 Nephi 13, which says that the Bible itself is a lie. I said, now, the main thing that you tell us is always that the Mormon propaganda is that we believe the Bible and the Book of Mormon. I says, no, that cannot be true. 1 Nephi 13 says the Bible is the devil's lie. And the best and most plain portions of the Bible were taken out by the Catholic Church. And they were hidden for centuries. It says that. So that's why I started with them, and I wanted them to see that. And I tell you, that was a good study, but they have a system where they kind of report on, not just help each other, but they report on each other to higher authorities. And one of the young men, I'll never forget it. This is my opinion, but I felt like he was pretty contemplative about some of those things. And he didn't have any answer. He says, well, and now the other guy was more the senior partner, and he was like, he would try to throw out whatever, just an answer or something. Well, what do you know happened? When they came back, about the third time, the junior partner was no longer there. They moved him out elsewhere, moved him somewhere else. Okay. So my conclusion was that the senior partner had told the higher authorities But the junior partner may be having some questions about Mormonism, and so they moved him out. So now that was gone. I now never knew what happened to him. Have you had that kind of experience, Bruce? That kind of thing? So but that's how they do it. But the point I'm making here is, this is a teaching call, and we want to teach, and I try to start where they are, if I can. I try to start where they are. But we do need to bring them to the Bible. So this is what the Bible teaches. Then finally, we have a decision call. That is, okay, we need to make a decision here. What are you going to do? And I studied with a man who was in the United Baptist Church. I remember this, and I'll never forget it as long as I live. It was really sad to me. We studied about baptism. I didn't want to talk about instrumental music and all that other stuff, the Baptist church. Baptism for the remission of sins. And he said, you know what? I see that. I think that's right. I said, well, you've seen that the Baptist church does not teach that. He said, I know. I said, well, let's baptize you into Christ. He stopped. My family will never forgive me. I just can't. My family will never forgive me. My wife's a United Baptist. My mother, United Baptist. My father and my in-laws are all United Baptist. My grandparents are United Baptist. They're all going to the United Baptist Church out here. I can't break from a family. I said, well, you know what? Jesus talks about that. You know, sometimes we have to take up a cross and follow him, even if it means families. He said, Bill, I think you're right. But I can't do it. That was it. Sad, isn't it? I didn't want to push him. I didn't want to mash him. I just said, you see it. I said, you see the truth, don't you? And he came out and said, yeah, I see the truth. I see, you're right. You're right. This is what it says. And I just can't do it. But at least he saw it. So anyway, okay, so those are the 4 kinds of calls. Now, having said that, let's go back here to this one now. So all of those things in mind, let's think about, before you reach the door, the 7 steps of an interview. Before you reach the door, at the door, this would, of course, applies not just at the door, but it applies whether you're sitting at work or whatever it may be. The opening, how you open, transition, and then the discussion, and then climax and closing. And I just have some things in here about that, which I think really kind of, at least in my mind, takes what Paul had said in 1 Corinthians 9 and just kind of makes it more practical for us in thinking about this. So let's talk about before you reach the door. Number 1, it's always good to have a prayer. And sometimes I've neglected that to my own shame, but we ought to pray about individuals, pray for the people whom you're going to visit, and remember, prayer is the one that answers door. Prayer is that which answers door. So that's what we need to do, pray about it. It's always good to go with another person. So when you go, it's good to establish a couple of things. Number 1, the name of the person. Here is one of my weak points. Okay, they just told me their name, and I'm going, what did they say? Remember the name if you can, because people like to hear their name. That's just the way it is. And I do too, everybody, you know, and if someone just meets me and then they call me by name, that's impressive for people to do that. So remember the name, and frequently you'll know the name of the person before you get there, but, you know, don't have your card say, okay, Anita, I'm here to visit, you know, no. You know, it's just, we want to make it more personal than that. And also, we have to get by the idea, we have to get along with, we're doing it with another person who's taking the lead. Remember, we talked about this, who's taking the lead. We don't both want to be going in different directions in our teaching and having people confused. So one takes the lead and one supports. The next calls you make, you might have someone else taking the lead. The other person supporting. Doesn't matter. But just as long as someone's supporting and the other one takes the lead and drives the conversation in the direction it ought to go. Does that make sense? All right, number 2, at the door. Always, of course, goes without saying, but be positive and friendly. And then here's the thing. This is what I always told salesmen. Step back. Okay, so if I'm coming to the door, and knocking on the door, and Nita opens it, and then I'm standing right here, you know. That's a little bit intrusive. It's almost like, oh, okay, you're in my space, almost kind of attitude. Don't, just knock on the door and step back. Just step back. Now, sometimes, every once in a while, you get a rude person when you talk to someone. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I don't want to talk about religion, whatever. But that's very infrequent. Now, here's one of the impressive things that always stuck with me. I remember when I was a teenager, and we were in the Chandler Church of Christ, and there was a man who was named Jim Pace. He was a black man, and we had two black families, and Jim Pace was the most kind, most genteel, and just a great Christian. And he kind of took me under his wing through the years after my dad left and helped me out, and he taught our classes. And you know, when we went door knocking, I went with Jim Pace. And this is something that happened at the door. I'll never forget. I went home and told Mother, and she was just so impressed. But the person that answered the door was deaf, could not hear. You know, Jim knew sign language, and he began. I didn't know that he knew it. And he began to speak in sign language to this. I thought, here's a man that's prepared. I went home and told Mom. She says, you know, that is a Christian who's prepared to meet whomever's at the door. I don't know sign language. I don't know those things. But he was able to communicate with this woman, and went very smoothly. I thought, wow, that was, I don't know if Jim is still living or not. He was living last time I noticed, checked in Chandler. But I don't know, I've always been impressed with that. He just was able to adapt himself to what the situation was. And so that's anyway, at the door, be positive. Then the opening. The opening, remember, always friendly, but read the situation. I put up here, speak about things that are interesting to them. What interests them? You know, there are a lot of things. For example, I went to someone's house just not long ago, and I noticed in the yard they had automobiles and engine parts all taken down, all that kind of stuff, which I don't like to do that in my front yard. I don't do it anyway, but so what do you think I tried to talk about? Cars. I know very little, but I try to talk about cars, and boy, you know what? People get talking about cars, and what are you doing out here with this? What's happening here? Well, here's what I'm trying to do, and here's what's going to happen, and here's next thing you know. And so, but that kind of, because sometimes they don't want to talk, and it's like, what are you here for? You know, and so you get talking like that, and so that helps them open up. Now, I'm not saying that I'm the master of anything like that, but I do try to talk about things that they're interested in, and that's always helpful. So remember that. So that's the opening. Read the situation. That is, what I mean by that is sometimes they're like, I've been to a couple of houses, just like here in Iowa Park, and some of the, like a lady might be having kids and she's trying to get out the door. Well, you know, just step, okay, hey, I'll come back some other time. Or whatever it may be, or if she or he is all upset and something's going on, or if someone's very sick, then, you know, you're going to have to divert that conversation, talk about those things. So that's what I mean by read the situation. But then finally, number 4 is the transition. Somewhere in visitation, either at the door, in the house, at work, or on the street with people, we need, and here's the bit difficult thing, to transition to the real issues of life, don't we? We have to transition. We have to quit. Okay, we want to be friendly, but we have to quit on that portion of it and start transitioning to more important spiritual matters. And that's the hard thing to do, isn't it? So how do we do that? How do you do that? Yeah, what do you think about, you might say, now, do you worship anywhere? Or do your children, would they like to come to Vacation Bible School if we had one of those? Something like that. Or, you know, something along the lines that kind of moves it in a direction that you would like to go to. You have to kind of move it in that direction sometimes. And so we're a little bit weak on that, aren't we? So right here is where 1 Corinthians 9 comes into play. Well, let's say they say, well, yeah, my kids have been going to the Baptist church, or I've been going to the Baptist, I don't go, wrong answer, beep, beep, okay. We don't, this is what I'm saying, I don't do any of that kind of thing, obviously. You know what, I try to find something positive. I am glad that they're mindful of worshiping God, aren't you? Now I'm going to give you this illustration. Let's say, for example, that you're in Saudi Arabia. You're not going to see any crosses. You're not going to see any churches. You're not going to see a denominational church. You'll not see any churches of Christ. It's all going to be underground. You're going to see women walking behind the men, all veiled completely. You'll not hear any statement regarding God, the Bible, in public at all. And it's going to be, if you mention it, you're going to be in trouble. So when you leave such a place, if you can get out of that country, won't you be glad to come to America, where people at least have the freedom to worship? And even though you believe that they're wrong and there's some of their convictions, that at least we have a place where we can worship, and that people are worshiping, and they do honor Christ. Maybe they don't honor him as the Bible directs, but they want to honor Christ. And I think that's a great thing. And I try to look at it that way, that we need to be thankful that people at least are trying to do that. And I'm thankful that people teach the Bible, want to speak about the Bible, we're going to worship. What makes me sad is driving into Iowa Park for Bible class and seeing ball games going on and seeing everybody out washing the car. As we left our place today, some of our friends, they claim to be denominational members, and they're out there with the horses and all that kind of thing, and every Sunday they're out there with their horses doing stuff. That makes me sad. Yes, ma'am. Well, so that's right. Yeah, you're going to go by the ball field, and they're going to be playing ball. And it used to be, when I was growing up, that we played ball. I played ball every year, all year round, ball. But we never played on Sunday and never played on Wednesday night. The coaches never would schedule a practice on Wednesday night. We would never play on Wednesday night, and we didn't play anything on Sunday. But nowadays, boy, I tell you what, Sunday morning, they'll have people out there playing ball. Sad, isn't it? That just shows the irreligion that we have in our country. So that's sad. But anyway, so somewhere along the line, we need to transition to that and make that a discussion. So then we have the discussion itself. And I just have a lot of things to say, but one thing I try to do, I don't want people to feel ignorant. So let's say I want to talk about Acts chapter 2. I'll say, well, turn to Acts 2 and start reading. Well, a lot of times, what are you going to find to be the case? They can't find it. They don't even know where Acts is. They don't know what testament it's in. And I just try to take my time and, okay, they don't know. And I don't want them to feel ignorant. And I just try to go along and just take my time and make it smooth as I can. And let's just talk. So if I see they don't know what testament to go to, I've done that a lot of times. I said, you have your Bible with you? I want you to look at Acts 2 for a moment. And they'll have a Bible like this one, and and they'll say, okay, what are you telling you right now? They don't know whether it's old or new. They don't have any clue. That's sad to me. And that's the way a lot of people are going to be. They're not going to know where it is. So I try to say, you know what? Sometimes I might kind of have a lighthearted thing to say about where it is or how to find it. Sometimes I say, well, if you let the Bible fall here, it'll open to Proverbs, and then if you go back this way a little bit, you'll find the New Testament, and then Acts is Acts of the Apostles, and to try to explain what Acts means. I know they don't know what it means, Acts. So anyway, my big thing is I don't want people to feel ignorant. I don't want them to feel like I'm talking down to anybody. I certainly don't want that. And then, any comments on that? Bruce, you've had a lot of times where you've talked to people And you probably have some thoughts on that. Well, I know in India, you probably have the same type of situation where you're evangelizing, right? And you're going to be evangelizing what kind of people? Aren't they Hindu primarily? Oh, I see. I see. Yeah, I didn't know that. Well, there was a preacher in America, not of the Lord's church. His name was Ravi Zacharias. You're probably familiar with him. I don't know if you've heard of him or not. Uh, yeah, he has written a lot of apologetic material, really good. But he grew up in a Hindu family in India, and he tells all about it, and then how the Muslims and Hindus in India, how it goes on there. But he tells a little bit about some of this also, how, you know what, you're talking to people in Hindu religion, and they're going to have completely different ideas than you do about stuff. And that, of course, we're not going to face that probably in America unless we keep the borders wide open. I don't know. But anyway, that's, but the point is, don't make them feel ignorant. Try to meet them where they are. And then the climax, okay. The climax can be, can I come back? Or can we have another study? Or can I set up a study? Can I come by and study with you sometime? I'd like to study. A lot of people say, no. Okay. I asked a couple not long ago, and they never gave me an answer. Because I took that, what that meant, no. They said, no, anyway, so can I pick you up? Can I pick you up for worship services? Can I pick up the children for worship services? Can I do that? I'll be happy to help you. There are people probably who will be saying, yes, I'll take a ride somewhere. But anyway, you have to come to the climax where okay, I would like to be able to, I'd like to have you worship with us if you can. Can we come back and have another study? Can we set up a study? Or can we set up a time? But here's one of the things too, and the final thing is the closing. I always say, I think this is important. Don't overstay your welcome. We have a hard time understanding overstaying our welcome. What do I mean by that? Yeah. Pretty soon, you know very well. Go ahead, Mr. Lockwood. Yeah. Well, I say, hey, we're going to go. I don't stand up and I stand another half hour talking. Now, we do sometimes when we're all friends, at meetings, prayer circles. But when you're there with someone, don't, if you're going to leave, say you're leaving, then make a nice exit. Don't stand up and then have another conversation unless they beg you to do it by asking you something. But I try to make it this way. I don't want, and I am personally conscious of try to be conscious of this. I don't want people to think that I've overstayed my welcome. I don't want people, so I always try to exit a conversation, even conversing with people, before they are thinking, I'm getting this glassy-eyed look like. I try to exit the conversation. It's better to exit early and say, you know what, I'd like to talk to him more, than to say, I like talking to Bill, but you know what? I mean, I can't get him out of the house. I mean, he stayed. We had to go. I had to feed my kids and, yes, ma'am. Yeah. Well, you know what? And that happens a lot. That kind of, where a family will say, we disown you, or we don't have anything to do with you. I found it to be the case that when there are young people that are getting married, and so I'll say, okay, and how did you grow up? And he said, well, I grew up, let's say, a Lutheran. Do you practice the Lutheran religion? No, I don't go to church. And then they get married. She's a member of the church. He's not a member of the church. They have a child. Now what happens? All of a sudden, he's very interested in Lutheranism, all of a sudden. Or they get married, and she says, let's go to church. No, I'm not going to go. I'm a Lutheran. Well, how do we move from, I don't go to church at all. I'm not a practicing Lutheran. That's how I grew up. All of a sudden now, no, we're going to baptize this baby. How did that happen? Well, the point that I'm making is people say that they're not affiliated. I mean, this is how I grew up, and I'm not really not practicing, blah, blah, blah. But they have deep-seated feelings about it nevertheless, and you're going to run into that, and that will happen. So I'm glad you're able to overcome that one. That's right. Okay, anything to add? Yes, sir, David? Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that in this day and time, we have to be exceedingly careful about picking up children or even visiting people without another person there. And it's good to have a husband and a wife, but even then you can get in trouble. And a lot of preachers have gotten themselves in trouble on that very issue right there, not just with children, but just visiting a woman, visiting a single woman. And, you know, people talk and say things that, you know, so that happens. That does happen. Right. Have to do that. Have to do that. So the point of all of this is, let's have it in our minds that we want to single out people in our minds that we want to try to win to Christ, that we want to strengthen, however it may be. And we want to pray about that and think about some of the approaches that we might be able to make to those individuals. So that's what this is all about. All right, anything to add as we conclude? Anything to mention?